The restaurant breathed money in every detail. The ceiling lights were dimmed just enough to make the crystal chandeliers glow like captive stars, and the white tablecloths were so pristine they looked untouched by human hands. Soft jazz slid through the air, wrapping itself around murmured conversations and the clink of cutlery. People here spoke quietly not because they had to, but because they were used to being listened to. At the center of the room, at a table positioned just far enough from the rest to suggest importance without isolation, sat Victor Hale. His presence was unmistakable, even for those who pretended not to stare. He was the kind of man whose stillness commanded space, whose tailored charcoal suit seemed less like clothing and more like an extension of him. He held his wineglass loosely, barely sipping, his gaze drifting across the room as though he were observing a market instead of dining in one of the city's most exclusive restaurants. Across from him sat Lillian Cross, his fiancée. She was beauty sharpened to a blade, perfect posture, flawless makeup, hair pulled back so tightly it revealed her cheekbones like sculpted marble. Her diamond earrings caught the light every time she moved her head, which was often. She drummed her manicured nails against the table, a silent metronome of irritation. This was not the restaurant she had wanted. It was not the table she had requested. And worst of all, it had taken too long for her food to arrive. Emma had been watching the table from a distance, rehearsing her steps before approaching. She had learned quickly that this section of the restaurant required more than precision, it demanded emotional awareness. One wrong tone, one misplaced pause, and the atmosphere could turn hostile. She smoothed her apron with slightly trembling fingers and lifted the plates from her tray, reminding herself to breathe. She needed this job. Rent, tuition, her younger brother's medical bills, all of it rested on nights like this. She approached with a practiced smile, gentle and professional. "Excuse me, ma'am, sir," she said softly. "Here is the sea bass with truffle reduction, and the risotto you requested." Lillian barely looked at the plate before her expression twisted. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice sharp enough to slice through the music. Emma's smile faltered but did not disappear. "That's the lemon-infused risotto, as ordered." "I said no lemon," Lillian snapped, finally lifting her eyes. "Are you deaf, or do you just enjoy wasting my time?" A few nearby diners glanced over, curiosity flickering across their faces. Emma felt heat crawl up her neck, but she kept her tone calm. "I'm very sorry, ma'am. I can have it remade immediately." Lillian exhaled loudly, pushing her chair back slightly as if the very air offended her. "Sorry doesn't fix incompetence." Victor's eyes flicked briefly toward Emma, then back to Lillian. He said nothing. "I'll take it back right away," Emma said, reaching for the plate. Lillian stood abruptly. The legs of her chair screeched against the marble floor, silencing several conversations at once. "Don't touch it," she said. "I want you to understand something." Emma froze, her hand hovering inches above the plate. "Ma'am, you people think a polite smile excuses stupidity," Lillian continued, her voice rising. "This restaurant is overrated, and so is the service." Emma swallowed. "I assure you, we strive to." The slap came without warning. It was not dramatic or exaggerated. It was quick, sharp, and deliberate. The sound cracked through the room like a snapped branch in winter. Emma stumbled back a step, her tray slipping from her fingers. Plates shattered against the floor, porcelain exploding outward. For a heartbeat, she didn't even register the pain, only the shock, the sudden ringing in her ears, the way the room seemed to tilt. Then the sting bloomed across her cheek, hot and undeniable. The restaurant went utterly still. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Glasses hovered in midair. The pianist's hands froze above the keys. A gasp escaped from somewhere near the windows, and then even that sound seemed too loud. Emma raised a hand to her face, fingers trembling as they brushed the spot where Lillian's palm had landed. Her skin burned, her eyes filled, but she blinked hard, refusing to let tears fall. Crying would make it worse. Crying would give her power she didn't deserve. Lillian lowered her hand slowly, flexing her fingers as though testing them. "Maybe next time you'll learn," she said coolly. Victor stood. The movement was so controlled, so measured, that it felt louder than the slap itself. His chair slid back silently. He placed his wineglass on the table with deliberate care, aligning it perfectly with the edge. When he looked at Lillian, there was no rage in his expression. That absence was far more frightening. "Lillian," he said quietly. "Sit down." She turned toward him, startled by his tone. "Victor, don't start." She embarrassed me. Around them, the silence thickened. No one dared speak. No one dared move. Emma stood rooted to the spot, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure others could hear it. You embarrassed yourself, Victor replied, his voice steady. And you crossed a line. Lillian scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. She's a waitress. They're used to this. That was when something shifted. Not just at the table, but in the room itself. A collective intake of breath passed through the diners, the staff, even the walls seemed to listen. Emma lowered her gaze to the floor, her shoulders drawing inward. I'll get the manager, she whispered, her voice barely audible. No, Victor said. The single word cut through the space between them. Emma looked up, confused. Lillian stared at him, disbelief flickering across her face. Victor's eyes never left Emma, and when he spoke again, it was with a calm that made the air feel suddenly colder. Stay right where you are. The restaurant remained frozen, suspended on the edge of something no one yet understood, but everyone knew would change everything. Victor moved first, and the room seemed to tilt toward him as if gravity itself had shifted. He stepped around the table slowly, deliberately, each measured stride amplifying the tension that clung to the air. Without a word, he slipped his tailored jacket from his shoulders and placed it gently around Emma's trembling frame. The fabric was warm, heavy with the faint scent of cedar and something clean and expensive. It was a small gesture, but it shattered the paralysis gripping the room. You're not leaving, he said quietly to her. His voice was low, steady, unmistakably protective. No one is asking you to leave. Emma's breath caught. She clutched the jacket closed with one hand, her other still hovering near her cheek. For the first time since the slap, her eyes lifted fully, meeting his. She saw no pity there, only certainty. Victor turned, his gaze sweeping across the stunned staff. Call the police. The words fell like ice into water. Lillian laughed, sharp and brittle. Victor, this is absurd. You're overreacting. She gestured vaguely toward Emma, as though she were an inconvenience rather than a person. She made a mistake. I corrected it. You assaulted her, Victor replied. His tone never rose, never softened. That's not correction. A murmur rippled through the restaurant now, cautious but undeniable. Phones appeared in hands, screens glowing like fireflies. A couple at a nearby table exchanged looks, the woman's hand flying to her mouth. The manager, a pale man in his 40s, hurried over, panic etched deep into his face. Sir, ma'am, please, the manager began, glancing nervously between Victor and Lillian. We can resolve this privately. Victor didn't look at him. You already failed to resolve it publicly, he said. Call the police. Now. The manager hesitated only a second before nodding sharply and retreating, his footsteps quick and uneven. Lillian's smile finally faltered. Victor, she said, lowering her voice, stepping closer to him. Don't humiliate me like this. Victor turned to face her fully. The distance between them felt vast despite the inches separating them. Humiliation, he said, is choosing violence because you think someone is beneath you. Her jaw tightened. You're choosing her over me. I'm choosing decency, he replied. Something you seem to believe is optional. Emma stood frozen, hardly daring to breathe. The room no longer felt hostile, but it was overwhelming, too many eyes, too many emotions crashing over her at once. Shame, fear, disbelief, and beneath it all, a fragile spark of relief she didn't trust yet. You don't understand, Lillian said, her voice trembling now, anger bleeding into desperation. People like us don't apologize to staff. It shows weakness. Victor's expression hardened. If that's what you believe, then you've never understood me at all. He reached into his pocket and removed a small velvet box. The movement drew every eye in the room. Slowly, he opened it and placed it on the table between them. The diamond ring caught the chandelier light and flared brilliantly, dazzling and cold. The sound it made as it touched the table was soft, but it echoed louder than the slap ever had. This ends now, Victor said. Lillian stared at the ring as if it had betrayed her. Her face drained of color. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious, he replied. Get your things. For a moment, it seemed she might argue again, might scream or throw something or collapse into tears. Instead, she straightened her spine, lifting her chin in a final attempt at dignity. You'll regret this, she said. Victor said nothing. The restaurant doors opened, and two uniformed officers stepped inside. The murmurs grew louder, no longer restrained. The manager approached them quickly, gesturing toward Lillian. One officer listened, his expression tightening as he looked at Emma's reddened cheek. Ma'am, the officer said to Lillian, we need you to come with us. This is ridiculous, Lillian snapped, but her voice lacked its earlier power. She glanced around, realizing too late that no one was on her side. Not a single face showed sympathy. As she was escorted toward the door, the room parted for her like water around a sinking stone. The doors closed behind her with a final, hollow thud. Silence lingered, then slowly dissolved into breath and movement. Someone exhaled loudly. A chair scraped. The pianist hesitantly resumed playing, the notes shaky at first, then steadier. Victor turned back to Emma. Up close, he could see how hard she was trying to hold herself together, the way her shoulders shook just slightly, the careful control in her eyes. He softened his voice. "I'm sorry you were treated that way." Emma swallowed, tears finally slipping free. "I thought I was going to be fired," she admitted quietly. "You won't be," he said without hesitation. "Not tonight. Not ever, if you don't want to stay." She blinked. "Sir, Victor," he corrected gently. The manager returned, wringing his hands. "Victor, please accept our apologies. Anything you need, medical attention, time off, compensation." Victor nodded. "She'll have all of that. And I want a written policy on staff protection implemented by morning. Zero tolerance." "Yes, sir, absolutely." Victor looked back at Emma. "Take the rest of the night off," he said. "Go home, rest." Emma pulled the jacket tighter around herself, nodding. "Thank you," she whispered. "For seeing me." He held her gaze for a moment. "You were always visible," he said. "Some people just choose not to look." As Emma walked toward the staff exit, heads turned, not with judgment, but with respect. The restaurant buzzed again, but the atmosphere had changed. Something irreversible had happened. Victor returned to the table alone. The empty chair across from him looked smaller now, insignificant. He sat, not to eat, but to finish what had begun, drawing a line the entire room would remember. And no one who witnessed it would ever forget the night power chose humanity, and cruelty finally met its consequence.